In this video, we're going to look at how to research for your speech and how to incorporate different types of evidence. It's also called supporting material, but we are learning to incorporate research into our speeches. Research is a requirement. In order for you to be an ethical speaker or establish credibility on why we should trust you, you need to tell us about your research. You cannot just assert things to be true without providing evidence to back it up. You always want to make a point and back it up. In order to back it up with evidence, we need to make sure that we're tracking our research and giving credit where credit is due. I know sometimes we always feel that other people say things better than we can, and so we just use their work or their ideas. And it's okay to use their ideas, but you have to give them credit. By giving them credit, it shows that you are doing your work. You actually gain more credibility because you are telling us where your research comes from. You are perceived as more trustworthy, more ethical than somebody who's just giving the evidence and the information. We actually tend to doubt people without proof. So we want to be ethical and responsible. We want to be appropriate and effective. So we require research for your speech, and we require you to tell us in your speech where it comes from. We will work on how to cite our research in our speech, what to say. We call those verbal source citations, and we will do that in another week or so. But you need to make sure that as you begin your research, if you think you might use it, save it, email it to yourself, keep good notes so that you can actually give credit where credit is due. So important to take notes while you research and track your research. We already mentioned that it actually enhances your credibility. You're going to be more trustworthy, but you usually find information that you may not already know, and that actually can be very interesting to the audience. So not only are you making a point and backing it up, but it often will be interesting to your audience, and that's one of our goals, to draw the audience in, make it relevant, appeal to the audience. So you have to have at least one piece of research from a library database. I recommend that you make friends with the librarian. I know you're not there in person, but you can have conversations, chats, emails, phone calls with the librarians. I have library tutorials posted on our course menu under tutorials. You'll also find tutorials in this week's folder. I recommend EBSCOhost, EBSCOHOST, for this speech. It is probably the best multi-subject database. You are welcome to use any of our databases, but EBSCOhost is going to probably be the most user-friendly. So I would recommend that. I have some images posted in the library tutorials on EBSCOhost. You also have a lot of other materials that you may use. You can use a variety of print resources, internet you may use. There's some caveats to that. Personal information. And while you might be an expert on the subject, there are other people that say the same thing. So while you might be knowledgeable, you still have to research your topic. You can use other electronic forms of research, and of course interviews are a type of research. Okay, so with our databases are purchased. We actually spend millions of dollars providing you with databases which are legitimate research. Okay, it's quality research. You're going to find academic journals in there. You're going to find magazines, newspapers, government websites, documents. You'll also even find ebooks and other sources in the library and in the database. Google is not your friend for research. It is not reliable. Neither is Wikipedia. Now, it doesn't mean you can't use the internet. There's just some caveats or warnings we need to consider. So when we're looking for information, we definitely need to have one of your research comes from a database and others can be from other sources. If you start researching and in about 10 minutes you can't find something in a database, you should contact the librarian. I don't need you to spend hours and hours and hours researching for this speech. It should be faster than that. Research is a required component of this course, but it is not everything about this course. So if you're struggling with finding information, then contact your librarian. There's many ways to do that. You'll see it on the library homepage. Okay, so there's a lot of different resources I mentioned previously. I've added a few more in on sometimes on this list. We might not, you could use a pamphlet, for example, or some more obscure types of research. But I'm going to introduce you to, a lot of you like internet, so what do you have to do? If you're going to use the internet, I have a few tips on internet here. I also am introducing you to what we call the CARP test. Anytime that you're doing research, you need to evaluate the source and the evidence. So when we're evaluating the information that we're reading, we want to work on the CARP test, CAARP. That's a fish, in case you didn't know. This image that I have on the screen here is actually a slightly different. They reversed the A and the R, but you need to, especially with the internet, you have to double check that it is a reliable source, because not everything there is reliable. There's a lot of fake news. You know this. There are fake websites. There are websites that appear to be news websites, but they're not. They're comedy. They're satire. So it's your responsibility, especially using the internet, that you've double checked that it's a reliable source. Is it credible, relevant, reliable, up to date, accurate, in context? I actually have a handout in a speech packet that I have posted. It's with your informative speech assignment, and it's really like a guide that walks you through everything related to your speech. And I have a handout that explains more about how you use this and what questions you would be asking yourself. You can also use this to test spam emails, right? The one that looks like it's coming from your bank, that email looks like that's coming from your bank, but it's not really. So this would be helpful and applicable to just sort of your safety, electronic safety and emails too. I also have an article for you to test out this week and a short video in the discussion board to look at, because I want you to be more aware of what you're looking at and evaluating it. Once you find some legitimate sources and you're finding that your materials are reliable, we want you to use different types of evidence in your speeches. We like variety. If you are talking about an athlete, a famous athlete, if you just give us all statistics, we are going to be lost. We are going to tune out rather quickly. We cannot handle that many statistics. So we want you to use variety. Consider scientific research. You might need to provide some definitions or explanations, examples, illustrations, statistics, quotations, expert opinion or testimony, lay testimony, comparisons and contrast. So as you're researching, you're going to want to look for a variety of evidence. Mix it up. What gets your attention when you're researching? What stands out? I give you a chart that basically tells you which types of evidence are more interesting. All of them will clarify. Some of them can prove a point. Some of them may not prove a point, but are still helpful, especially in informative. We're not as concerned about proof in our informative speeches. So this just gives you an overview of what each piece of evidence can do for you in a speech. I then provide you with a quick definition of each type of evidence and when to use it. And you've learned some of this in your informative speaking chapter. You have definitions. You would give us the dictionary that you used. An explanation. If it's just you explaining it, that's great. If it's somebody else explaining it, you would give credit for that explanation, which would be great because that then meets the requirements of your verbal source citations in your speech and it adds to your credibility. You can use examples and illustrations. Statistics. If you want to use statistics, we have a couple of rules for statistics. One, oftentimes percentages are easier for us to hear. You might consider that, or fractions. Sometimes it's important to give actual numbers, so you get to choose how you're going to convey the information. We recommend that you would use a visual for your information. There are different types of charts and graphs depending on what you want to communicate. And then we ask that you round off numbers unless you have a specific point to make. We have difficulty processing numbers. So when you're using statistics, there's some keys to success. Over here on the right side of your screen, you want to make sure your sources are unbiased. You want to give us the source of those statistics. If you don't give us a source, we're not going to believe you. Consider putting those numbers up on the visual so we can see the numbers and hear the numbers. And if you can relate the statistics to the audience, it will be easier for us to understand. Back when we had Hurricane, was it Harvey in Houston a few years back? Pete Delkus is the chief meteorologist on ABC, and he gave a word picture to describe how much rain had fallen. And I don't remember the actual number, but like maybe 50 billion gallons of water. And I can't picture what that looks like. So he gave a word picture analogy for us and said, if you imagine the state of Texas full of water, you would be walking around knee deep in the water. That's how much that water was. That was helpful. Now we understand what that means. Quotations. Those could be literary quotes from books, movies, speeches, literature, poetry, etc., even textbooks, etc. But opinions are also a type of a quotation. And so then there's expert opinion and lay opinion. Experts are clearly those who are well versed in a subject, right? They have maybe a degree or expertise in that field. But lay testimony, that's sort of your personal experience, or somebody maybe who eyewitnessed. They may not be an expert in the car accident and can't measure the skid marks on the pavement to determine the rate of speed that the car was traveling, but they saw the accident. And so that lay testimony is valid. It's just not really strong. But don't ignore that. A lot of times you ignore that because you don't think it's important. We like lay testimony. It's personal. It's very helpful, but it works best when it's combined with hard data, statistics. Okay, so be sure to use expert opinion and don't forget lay opinions. You can use figurative or little comparisons. That helps us make word pictures. Those would be like similes and metaphors. Comparisons are also a great way for us to understand where you are, maybe what your point is or where you're headed, might give us a better picture of what you're talking about. We always want to document our research. You should be creating a works cited page or a bibliography. You may use MLA or APA, your choice. You're going to tell us in your speech where your information comes from, at least 3 times, verbal source citations. Make sure you double check the speech assignment for all of the requirements for this speech. So you should have a good idea of where to start. Get going on your research and find some interesting evidence to use in your speech.